Nike uses a thing called Interlink that they have some of the smartest Tableau people around, and they've been doing it for longer than virtually any other consultant. And we have James, who works here at Nike, essentially. That's our Interworks representative, and he does all the, really helps us adopt this through the enterprise and promote best practices, does teaching, so we're very lucky. Now, then, we have Dan, who came all the way from Atlanta just to present out here for, we had a DAMA meeting this morning, which is Data Management Association, and then this evening, the Portland TUG group, the Tableau User Group. So Dan is a published author. In fact, the reason you're putting names in that bucket or that bowl are that he's given away 2 of his books, and they are highly prized. So there's probably better than any other time you've had where you probably will get picked on this. And if not, I'd highly recommend going out and buying it. It'll help you a lot.
Now, Powell's inventory today dropped by 50%. One of the 2 books was sold.
That was way.
I should have left that alone.
And Dan
50% reduction in inventory in 3 hours.
Yeah.
Bestseller.
Obviously, it's caught fire. It's caught fire, But I'm told that Amazon has some others, so it's all good. Yeah, he's a really witty, smart guy, and so we had a big presentation this morning where we went over kind of the basics and how to adopt it and promote it within the enterprise. We'll get more technical in this discussion. And also, it'll be a very good Q&A. Feel free to ask any questions, and this is among the best resources you could ever ask to answer your question.
Actually, the team here is probably one of the best resources you'll ever have.
Yes, and if you're here at Nike, know that on Tuesdays at 11 o'clock we have Tableau Hour here, and it's promoted by the North America Analytics Group, and they usually hold it either in this room or next door, and if you ask me, I can forward it on to you, and believe me, there's some great stuff. James very often is presenting there, or we have others that are actually using it and presenting what they are doing as best in breed, and we're really proud of that. So a lot of time and investment is put into that. So Dan, take it away. Thank you very much for coming.
It's been
big
fun.
hand of welcome, please.
Amazing place. And I want to ask a couple of questions. First off, how many of you were here this morning? Oh, about half. How many of you don't work at Nike? Oh, good. So you got about 20% non-Nikes. Well, it's really thrilling for me to be here because I've been buying Nike stuff since I was probably old enough to have money. And actually the first Nike commercial I remember is a John McEnroe one, like smashing his racket. I played tennis competitively for a long time, and so I was, when McEnroe was just starting, I was a little bit younger than him. And so I was like a ball boy at the U.S. clay courts, and I got really close to John McEnroe, and I thought that was the coolest thing on earth at the time. And I played a little in college tennis, but my tennis days are over. and I just, Nike kind of sort of goes back to high school for me. I was buying Nike stuff then. That was a while ago. So I'm thrilled to be here, and I think this is the first time I've ever been to Portland as well. So I've averaged something like 40 weeks a year traveling for probably 15 years, and somehow I've never been to Portland before. This is the first time. So the city is cool, people are nice, Nike is even cooler, and even nicer people. So I don't know what else to say other than I'm jealous of the people from Interworks that are here all the time. It's just an amazing place. So I may ad-lib a little bit on this talk since there were a lot of people here this morning. I am going to expand on some themes. Normally at Tableau user groups, the normal mix of people are relatively new Tableau users, right? And that usually means they haven't done much with it, A. And B, maybe there's a couple of zealots in their company and they're having trouble getting other people to listen to them because they don't really know how to articulate the value of it. So a lot of these, when I do the talk, I try to talk about things to help them do whatever trying to do. Usually get more people interested. So the way I like to do that is I talk about how I got started with this tool in 2007. And I told a teeny little bit of that story. I'm going to expand on that tonight. The data flood is sort of a repeat of what I talked about this morning. I might go quickly through that. Being an evangelist and getting buy-in, I didn't really talk about earlier, so I'll expand on that. The deployment strategies we did go through, that's sort of a repeat. And then building effective dashboards, I did a small portion of that this morning. I'm going to do a little bit more on that. So it really, you can build beautiful things in Tableau pretty easily, but do they load quickly? Are they understandable to people? Do the navigation, is it intuitive? You know, that sort of stuff. What things can you do to make it easier for people that have never seen it before successfully navigate through dashboards that you're giving them? So that's probably going to take an hour to 70 minutes, and as many questions as you have afterwards, I'm happy to answer. So, what's my first Tableau project? I spent almost 20 years in manufacturing in a company that made big capital equipment. But like Nike had a supply chain that stretched from China through Poland, through the Netherlands, several places in North America. The difference was we had big, huge machines with hundreds of thousands of parts. And we had a unique set of circumstances. During the late 90s, we were bought by a really large company that said, here's some fake money, go out and roll up an industry. And so we did that. I think at one point I bought 4 companies in 1 month myself. I was the due diligence team. It was crazy insane. There was a period in the late 90s where stock was just worth way more than cash. And so, you know, we looked at it and said, okay, this is a once in a lifetime deal. No one can be this crazy to just say, go buy everything under the sun with this currency we have that's not even money. And then what was even more amazing is that people accepted it like it was money. So we bought like 60 companies in 4 years, and then the parent company couldn't make a bond payment, and then they started divesting it all. So we went from, it was like, what's the right word? The Big Bang, and then contraction, all within an 8-year period. And so I was there at the beginning of the Big Bang, and then also there after the contraction. The Big Bang was a lot more fun than the contraction, by the way. So my first Tableau project came after we had divested our parent company. So we went from pretty big company in terms of what we did, close to $1 billion in revenue, and actually our parent was about $75 billion, to a $200 million company in total, and the piece I was working in was about $80 million. But we were global. We had all the complexity of a global company that had a global supply chain, global customers, global logistics. The difference is our budget was not like a global company. And the staff of people I had went from a pretty sizable staff to about 7. And then the president came and said, Dan, we got all these different businesses still. They're shrinking. And yet the reports in Asia look one way. The reports in Europe look another. The reports in North America look a third way. I think we need to have a new ERP system, because I want my reports to look the same. He didn't say it that way, but that's what I said to him. I said, Brian, you're willing to spend $2.5 million, take 2 years, lose 20% of the workforce to make your reports look the same. Am I understanding that right? And he said, yeah, I guess I am. I'm like, okay. So we spent 6 months looking at that, and it was going to be more like $3 million in 2 years and probably lose 40% of people. So I didn't like the idea, and I happened to be on a flight going from somewhere to Atlanta, and I sat next to a guy who was worked for one of the big BI houses. I'm sure you own their software, all right? And by the end of the flight, I had 5 pages of notes, and I'm like, this is the answer. Building a data warehouse can't be that hard. I invited the guy into my office the next week. He brought a tech with him. We spent the whole day papering the walls, and I thought, this is fantastic. This is my answer. I'm going to have this knocked out really quickly. I thought it can't be that hard. And 2 weeks later, I get this quote that's about this big. We weren't that big a company, by the way. It was literally like a phone book, and then there was fine print that had about another 80 or 90 points. And then around point 36, it didn't say it this way, but this is what it meant. And Dana Murray will be available to do 60% of the work for the entire project. Oh, and we want a $200,000 down payment. Trust us, you'll love it. And I thought, wow, that sucks. That's not exciting at all. Because A, I'm not that trusting, and B, we got a flickering here. So I'll move. Maybe I'm stepping on the wire. Anyway, this was the project, all right? And I thought, this can't be that hard. And if we got to do 60% of the work, I got to figure out another way to do this. And I really had no idea what that was. So I started reading a lot. I went back to my boss and said, you know, Brian, I know you wanted the ERP, and then I had this. Could you give me like another month to figure out an answer here? Because I don't like any of the options. I mean, none of them are good for us. But we'll try to figure out something. And I started reading everything I could find, and I did it work. Actually, pretend it's not flickering. So, you know, I struggled for a week or so, and then I ran into a couple of books by a guy named Stephen Few. How many of you have heard of Stephen? Good. Everybody should write down that name. Stephen Few. He doesn't pay me to say that either. He has a blog called Perceptual Edge. And what I liked about what Stephen had written is that, and he's not a Tableau guy, he's a visual analytics guy. He doesn't care what the tool is, he just does visual analytics. And what I liked about it, here, I'll make it better. So what I liked about what Stephen advocated was, he was worried more about the end user and how people interacted with data and how to make data understandable to people. I thought that's the exact opposite of every other book I've read on data warehousing. Data warehousing is interesting, but actually it's interesting to data geeks. It's not very interesting to bosses that need to make business decisions, or to people that are in operations that have to live and die by what they decided yesterday. So that was what I liked about what Stephen had written. It was all about how to make it easier, more accessible, more understandable. And so I called him and started telling him my sob story. And after about 5 or 10 minutes, he was like, well, Dan, this is really interesting. And I said, well, can you help me? And he goes, well, probably not. And I'm like, well, why? And he said, well, I'm booked for the next 9 months, and I don't think you can wait that long, can you? And I said, no, really, I can't. And he said, but based on what you've told me, I think you should look into this little company up in Seattle called Tableau. And it was, you know, I couldn't even pronounce or spell the word at that point. And I said, Tableau? Let me write it down. And he said, yeah, you can go to their website and you can download a software, a trial version of it, fully operational in a couple of minutes. And they have their prices on the website. I'm like, wait a minute. BI tool that you can download and install in 2 minutes, and they put their prices there. You mean I don't have to talk to a salesperson? He said, that's right. I'm like, okay, what's missing? He goes, I don't think anything in the use case you've described, I think it will work for you. I said, okay, I'll give that a whirl. So I went home, it was a Friday night. I downloaded the software, installed in 2 minutes. And I'm cheating a little bit because I'd been at this company for 20 years. I had literally installed every ERP system, every day. I knew every aspect of it. And because I have a short attention span, I'd been in almost every job there was to be in there for a couple of years, in every part of the world. So I had a lot of just enough experience everywhere that I knew what the manager of that job was thinking about what they needed, because I was probably in that job at one point or another. So it was very easy for me to say, oh, that list of things that we had here, this one, if I can get it to work again. That list that you can almost see, I'll tell you what it is. It's basic, all right? Really basic information. Just the nuts and bolts of running a business. I was able to take that, the data for that, and build what my boss was willing to spend millions to get. Walked into his office the next Tuesday and had 4 of the 5 reports. The purchasing one, we had a little bit of data quality issues that I didn't feel comfortable showing it. But I showed him the other things in that amount of time. And when I walked into his office and showed it, the first reaction was, this is really cool. The second reaction was, I didn't authorize you to spend any money. I said, I didn't. I built this with a trial license. But you do owe me and my wife dinner for 2 nights because I worked the whole weekend on it. I said, okay, that's a good deal. And at that point, I started getting an inkling. This was pretty amazing that I could do that. Now, I also operated under a misconception that people that were accounting, I was a CFO and a CIO, that just about anybody could do it because I didn't know better. We had a small team, but we had a pretty good small team. And we had to wear a lot of hats because the industry we're in, you either did that or you didn't survive. So it was a little bit unusual circumstance. And I found out when I became a consultant that wasn't a normal circumstance. But the point is, we had a huge success almost immediately, and it proved the value. And I had not spent a penny on the software yet. So I started feeling guilty at that point. So this is the little insight that we derived. In the flickering lights here, I'm going to describe it. Because we didn't have anyone in our company that understood databases or data schema, we architected everything in spreadsheets and made the schema in a spreadsheet because I could explain this tab, which I'm naming fact whatever, is where most of the numbers are. This little tab here that's called dim customer or dim region or dim blah is thus filtering and sorting things. And then by plopping Tableau on top of that and doing all the joins like you would do in a regular database, we actually were able to do ETL on the fly before we had any sort of ETL process for our ERP systems. And this was the first insight I got that, wow, this is really amazing, because the dirty little secret of every quote I got from BI people was 80% of the work was data cleaning. When you develop the schema, you have to figure out all these data quality problems that people aren't used to looking at. So I'm turning that off for the moment. That was when I first realized this is a big deal that nobody knows about yet. Because I could take a spreadsheet, plop Tableau on top of it, and all the problems that you'd get in an enterprise-type data warehousing project, I could flop out in an understandable format for non-technical people to understand. And at the same time, I was teaching them data schema. So I had 8 people in different parts of the company that every Monday, they got a little report that said, here are your data quality problems. Now, how are you going to fix them? Why did that happen? And then, of course, they ignored it for the first couple of weeks, so I would go and visit them. Say, I'm not going to leave you alone until you answer my question. What are you going to do about the process that caused this error? Because it's a bad business process. And so we spent about 3 months just fixing our data, our processes, our business processes, and documenting the fixes. So I was building a little reservoir of knowledge of, here are the corrections we did, here's why they happened, here's the resolution. So we did that for about 4 months, and at the end of the 4 months, guess what? Our number of errors in our process started really sharply declining. So the benefit we got pretty rapidly was reduced errors in the process, because the managers in charge of the processes were getting feedback every week on where the errors were. So it was an interesting phenomenon in that Monday mornings I used to call it the aw shit phenomena. People would come into work, look at something, aw shit, that same problem that I've had for the last 5 years is still occurring. and they wasted their morning fixing all the aw shits from the last week. Well, that factor started sharply declining. And then I thought, ooh, there's another interesting insight. We're actually making our business better by just implementing reports using Tableau. And then I started talking. Dave Charleston is actually your sales rep here at Nike, who was also my sales rep back in the day when I first started. This is 2007. And there were a couple other people at Tableau that I was conversing with pretty regularly, and they said, Dan, you ought to come to the first conference and talk about this, because nobody's actually done what you're doing there. I'm like, really? Okay, so I went and talked at the first conference about that story. Only I managed to make it last an hour. And I thought everybody was asleep at the end of it. But then the night they have a little party at the conferences, and about 100 people came up to me and asked me a bunch of questions. And then for the next 3 or 4 months, I started getting phone calls from people saying, could you do that for us? And I started thinking, been at this company 20 years. I got a nice cushy job, a month's vacation. You know what, this would be fun. Why don't I quit and do this? And I went home with that idea to my wife. She said, are you insane? But I did anyway, because I thought, this is something everyone needs. They just don't know it yet. I had a firm belief in that in 2007. And here was the last part of my story. After doing that for several months, I went to Interworks, who is a company I had worked with for several years. I hired them to do other work. And I said, and Brian Bickle, who's still on the team, is the guy I was working with. I said, Brian, here's the schema in a spreadsheet for all these different things. Here's the ETL logic. Here are all the documented errors. How long to build the database? He said, 4 days. I'm like, well, 4 days. So the cost to deploy went from, well, literally, we ended up deploying in this model at 10% of the cost of the least costly quote I got from a traditional BI vendor. Now I'm thinking, everyone really does need this. And I wasn't thinking of big companies. I was thinking of the hundreds of thousands of entities in the United States alone that have no data warehouse. You know, how many people 5 years ago, entities in the United States, had true BI? Not a tiny fraction of the potential market for this. And I thought, this is a giant market. And that was my go-to-market strategy, all right? Completely flawed, wrong strategy. I failed miserably for the first year. And what I didn't realize is, A, most people didn't get why visual analytics was a useful tool. You can't talk about it. You have to show people something. Then they get it. Because I would walk around, literally I was traveling everywhere, and I had a little 3x5 index card that had a time series chart with a little blip on it. And I would sit down at a bar, literally, and say, sir or ma'am, what do you think about this? They'd look at me like, who is this kook? And I'd say, no, what's the first thought you have in your mind? And the range of answers I would get would be, we're in a recession, and to, the patient is dead. I thought, context is important here. The range of answers is pretty vast. And I started realizing I had to show people things that were meaningful to them. And when that happened, we went from sort of okay progress, not really going anywhere, to massive uptick, just by showing people something they hadn't seen before with their data. So the lessons I learned in my early deployment were, if you can go quickly without talking too much, you know, don't talk to your boss about all the great, wonderful things you're going to do. Do something first. And I also found that in a lot of situations, you can start with spreadsheets. It's enough data where you can actually build a convincing story with visual analytics. You don't have to go out and spend a bloody fortune just to get started. Pick a domain that's small enough that you can do that. And then the payback is really rapid. So this is, between flickers, you'll be able to see, for us, this was a pretty big number, because we were doing bi-weekly management reports by continent. And I'm sorry for people here this morning if this is a repeat. But we were saving at the end of the first month that much money a year in report preparation time, because we had every week we generated reports for the US, reports for Europe, reports for Asia, and it was fairly expensive, people building them in spreadsheets with pivot tables basically. And we were able to go with Tableau and give it to a front desk secretary and say, here's the checklist. Just open this file, point it at this file, press F5, do file save as, and done. And it was very mechanical. It went from high-priced people to the lowest priced person in the office. And so that was the very easy to measure savings, time saved in expensive resources that we could now redeploy using their talent for other things. So we're going to a new presentation. Yeah, here's where I ended. A little discussion on all the little tabs that say the word dim and fact. All right, I think this is where we left off. So sorry for the technical difficulty. All right. So the point is that we got a very rapid payback, and that wasn't even the real payback. The real payback is a lot of hard to measure things, you know, or harder, more difficult to measure things. That was our easy to measure savings, and that's when I realized everybody needs this tool, they just don't know it yet. So I'm going to talk a little bit about big data, and I did discuss this morning. You know, we have this volume and velocity issue that has really been solved. When we started with Tableau, the entire data in all the world was 310 exabytes in theory. I think somebody from Berkeley figured this out a few years ago, and a few other people like IDC have added to that knowledge base. When we started working with Tableau, seriously, data had grown considerably. And you can see the best projections now are it's doubling like every 2 years, and it's actually doubling at a faster rate as time goes on. So the orders of magnitude here are really hard to grasp. You know, if I do a calculation of the comparison of how much data we've created this year to the federal budget debt, it's hundreds of millions of times bigger magnitude of number. And these sorts of numbers here are just really unfathomable. And it's amazing to me that all the words ever spoken, if they were converted to text, would only be 5 exabytes of data. And if you converted the words to actual audio, it's 42 zettabytes of data. And then this last number, the yotta-bits, there's a network that the NSA has that is a yotta-bit sized network. This is a data center that the NSA just finished in Utah, with the alarming warning there. And I have to admit, I'm a little bit distrustful of government. I grew up at the sort of the Vietnam War time, and then you know, just about every bad thing in government. I was just the perfect age to sort of just barely understand what was happening. So I have a sort of a general mistrust of government. And then when I first got out of school, I worked for a guy that did LBOs and ran around the country buying companies and doing things. And I happened to have an experience while I was a CFO for a bankrupt company that I hadn't worked with or for a year. And I got this little notice from the IRS that said, we've frozen all your assets, you're guilty, you didn't make payroll tax deposits last week. Like, well, that's really interesting. I haven't worked there for a year and a half. So I'm not surprised I didn't make the payroll tax deposits. And so what happened was that sometime after I left, there was a new person in there that decided payroll tax deposits were optional, which they aren't, obviously. And so they froze everybody's assets. So it took me a year to get rid of that problem. That's when I really solidified my distrust of anything related to government. So this disturbed me a little bit when I started realizing what kinds of things government in this yotta-bit-sized network can look at. Every email you've ever sent, every website you've visited, every movie you've watched on Netflix, things you've bought from Amazon, where you've gone with your cell phone. I mean, it's really kind of amazing the width of stuff that they can get to. Commuter toll records if you pay with a credit card. There's literally no secrets. Right? Privacy is gone, has been for a while. And I know I've worked with some entities that, use Tableau to study bad guys' behavior. And if you're a bad guy with a cell phone, you're really a dumb bad guy. You're going to get caught, and it doesn't matter where you are in the world. They can look at all this stuff. So there's lots and lots of good things that they're doing to prevent bad things, but I always worry about the bell curve. And one person this morning, I called out all statisticians this morning, and no one raised their hand to admit it. I knew there had to be at least one in the room, and she actually came up to me afterwards and said, yeah, I'm one of the ones that you called out. I didn't want to admit it. But, the bell curve in a large hierarchy, you've got the vast majority of good people in the middle. They're just nice people, do the right things. You got the saints that no matter how many bad things happen to them, they're still saints. They're always wonderful. And then over on the other side, you have the scumbags. No matter what, they never do the right thing. And that's what I worry about in big hierarchies. That side of the bell curve, how many of those people are there and what could they do? That's my worry with this sort of stuff. And so you see in the news a lot now, there's a lot of discussion about this because a lot of stuff that people could get to was surfaced very recently, and it concerns a lot of people. We still have this notion, a quaint one, of privacy, but it really doesn't exist. So this is a calculation I did, and that time is wrong. Oh, I haven't updated this one, sorry. The one I had this morning was actually updated by me at 5:40 a.m. It's a considerably bigger number. This is just through the 28th of January. This is how much data we've created just since the beginning of the year. Just this year. So if you remember that chart earlier, this one, now that was not even through the end of January. We've created more data than we had since the beginning of time to that year. Just in the first 28 days of this year. It's a staggering massive number, 462 exabytes of data just in the first month. So, it would take that many 1 terabyte drives to store it. It would, if I went to Apple and had to buy my MacBook Pro with my 1 terabyte SSD, that's how much money it would cost then. Actually, this morning the number is 1.98 billion. So, if you buy a MacBook Pro with a 1 terabyte drive, a pretty good business for Apple. And obviously it's not a problem, because we're not running out to buy the storage. There's no, there's nobody worried about bandwidth running out on the internet. It just sort of appears at the right moment before it's a big problem. So this is a largely solved problem at the moment. I mean, storage is keeping pace. Maybe it's not all useful data, but we're able to store it. And this is really the big challenge here. Storing and picking the data that you want to look at isn't such a problem, but being able to connect to all the variety of things that are available for storage is pretty staggeringly complex now. I'm sure I didn't find all of them, but based on what I could find and identify as a database product of some kind, there's 190 of them now, and they fall into these sort of basic categories: this traditional relational data warehouse, non-relational databases like Hadoop. By the way, is anybody doing Hadoop in the room? Yeah, it seems to be a bi-coastal phenomena right now where people like Google, Facebook, eBay, Amazon are doing it. But then there's big banks in the East Coast that are using it. But largely there aren't many deployments in, I'll say, the average normal business yet. There's a lot of experimentation going on in different industries, but not many deployments. So that whole world is new. Tableau connects to those things. These grid cache storage systems are sort of webizing that. There's actually relational databases that run on distributed systems over the web. Have any of you heard of a product called NuoDB? I didn't think so. But these things are now being invented every month, it seems, for particular use cases. And it's really complicated. So this variety issue is the big challenge now. You got to be able to connect to a lot of different things, because your data, if you're a big company, it definitely doesn't reside in one place. And even if you're a small business now, it doesn't reside in one place. It's all over the place. So products that help you stitch it all together are helpful. And this is another interesting statistic. We've got all this data, but we actually look at 1% of it. So now I have this theory that certain companies have figured out how to look at more than 1% of it. I buy a lot of stuff at Amazon, and I am the trained Amazon gerbil. I buy a book, and the next morning when the email shows up with 10 more books, there's usually 1 or 2 that oh, that's really, and I've got like 80 books on my Kindle now, which is amazing. You know, now I don't read 1 book at a time, I read 3 books at a time. I have a book for the evening, a book for lunch, a book for before I go to work, and they're all distinctly different genres. You know, the evening is, I don't want to think too hard, so it's some kind of fiction. But Amazon has brilliantly mined my clickstream on their website, and they can tell me what I want before I know I want it. You've probably heard the headline just in the last couple of weeks that they're thinking of a service where before you buy it, they're going to ship it. How does that work? Oh, you did. We knew you were going to need this next week, so we shipped it to you. Return it if you don't want it. You know, that's pretty ballsy. But I mean, they probably will get away with it. They'll probably figure out how to make it arrive like 2 hours after you actually bought it, so that you're going to think, wow, how did they know that? I want them to deliver pizza and get my groceries as well. So the key message here that I have is that we're pack rats. We don't even know what it is we're going to do with this data. We just store it like a squirrel digging holes for acorns, and then we figure out later whether or not we're going to use it, kind of like a squirrel randomly searching through a massive pile. So this ability to take a larger percentage of that pie, even if it was 10% of the available possible data, there's probably some gold there. And Tableau is part of the solution because it can connect all these different data sources and do it in a fairly intuitive way. It's not the only part of the solution. You know, you need people in this room, so you have to develop some skill, right? So, the Tableau people are great. They built this tool that's very intuitive, but obviously it can't do everything for you. You have to have some data you connect to. It's good if you know a little bit about the schema you're connecting to, so you can affect joins. So there's some technical ability at some level needed. Now, what's interesting is exactly what you're doing, what Nike is doing here. There's a relatively smaller group of technical people that are maybe doing the initial joins, and then publishing those sets out for other people that are less knowledgeable to work with, who maybe know more about the business process and some of the urgencies of whatever operational manager needs something, which is a really desirable attribute. Because I found 3-4 years ago, I never tried to sell Tableau or anything related to Tableau to an IT person. Why? Because they ask a lot of questions, and they always were unpleasant ones to answer, like, will it scale? And at the time, before version 6, it couldn't. I had a 100 million record test file. I used to test a dashboard load with different versions. Before version 6, that data set took 55 minutes roughly to load. That just wasn't going to work. All right. Version 6 came out, and that went to something like 38 seconds. Version 6.01, it went to 22. 6.02, it went to like 12 seconds. Now it's like 7 to 8 seconds. So Tableau has been really ruthlessly pursuing scaling their product. You know, they reinvented their extract engine, and now all of a sudden it became something enterprise clients were seriously interested in. But they were still missing some pieces like the extract engine had to have a one-to-one relationship to each dashboard or worksheet. All right, well, we had clients early on that ran out of nighttime for refreshing extracts and hard disk space. So Tableau, ooh, I guess we need to make each of these like a little database so it can connect one to many. And they did that fairly rapidly. So Tableau iterated very quickly as they got customer feedback and made their product better. So about 3 years ago is when I started talking to IT people, because now it became something they'd seriously consider. And that's when Tableau did a whole nother level of growth. So this component, though, is important. You know, everybody's business is a little different. Data is data, but the same problems exist everywhere. You got to have some knowledge of the schema. You have to know how to do a join. There's data quality issues you have to be concerned about. So it's a brilliant tool, but it can't do all of that. That's when I went to Tableau and said, you need partners. No, we don't need partners. I said, yes, you do. Your product's brilliant, but it's all these things around Tableau that you can't control that your customers are going to need help with. And Tableau really didn't think they needed partners at that point. I'm leaving here, going to Las Vegas tomorrow to a first partner summit in North America. There's 165 partners that are going to be there. Do you know how many people were at the first Tableau conference in Seattle? 152 people. So there's more partners coming to the partner summit now than there were people interested in going to a customer conference. So it's come a long way. Now, one of the other issues that I see people having that are really excited about Tableau and user groups is that they're excited about it, but they don't know how to get other people excited about it. And they get frustrated. And I deal with this a lot with clients. How do I get people to listen to me? And I say, well, talk less, do more is the main message. But then you also have to be able to articulate what the pictures are saying. You know, it's brilliant at visualizing, but you still have to put a narrative with it. You have to help people interpret what the pictures mean. Sometimes it's very obvious. Other times there's a little bit of story you have to tell. And so I've started or been involved with starting 3 different user groups in the US, so the first one and then a couple others. And one of the things I've found is that data people are not used to getting up in front of a group and talking about their work. And I thought, well, how can we make data people more comfortable with that? So we started shaping the Tableau user group in Atlanta to be 4-hour sessions where we bring in a speaker. The speaker talks about a cool topic, shows some examples. Then we build a data set for that meeting, and we break everybody up into usually about 5 teams, 1 experienced people per group, and we have them build things, and then at the end of it, we'd have the experienced person in the group nominate the most frightened person to get up in front of the room to talk about it. So the whole goal was to punch people out of their comfort zone and get them to talk about what they've built in a non-threatening, non-political environment. Well, I'm sure it was threatening, but not political. And so this little story I've seen repeat now over and over. People that were sort of brilliant and great at what they did develop a new sort of personality. And there's a lot of people in the Tableau community that I knew 5 or 6 years ago that would be sitting in the corner hiding, that are now talking in front of groups of people. And it's really interesting to see that happen. And I think this is true. People pigeonhole themselves in a way of thinking about themselves that just isn't the case. You can be whatever you want to be. It's just a matter of intent. So, you know, my getting buy-in message is, you know, get more comfortable with talking about the work you're doing, but also move quickly and start small. I had 2 big companies last week ask me, how should we deploy this? And I'd say, well, pick a project you can finish in a month and just do it. You don't have to spend a lot of money. Build something really compelling and then show it to your boss. And it will be a usually fairly convincing argument if you pick the right project. So this is number 1. Pick something you can finish quickly and have it be something that's maybe not what your boss would ask for. Because if you wait for your boss to ask you for something, chances are they're going to ask you for something that's not very good. Because their context is going to be all the bad stuff they've seen the last 20 years. Grids, typically, of numbers. I mean, I was guilty. I was an accountant early in my life. After the 300th close, I got to realize that things weren't going to get more thrilling, and I decided to change. But, I mean, grids of numbers are usually only interesting to people that are crossword puzzle sort of mentality, love that sort of detail work. Take a sales or marketing person, and that's like a death sentence to them. So the early adopters of Tableau were usually sales and marketing people. They really were, just show me the chart. I just want to see what's important. Don't make me look at all this other stuff. So, and I tell people, don't do what your boss asks you to do. Do something better than what your boss asks. Now, I realize that's easy for me to say because I don't work for your boss. But, you can always use it or tell it in a way that says, boss, you inspired me so much by asking for this. I decided to work more and build this better stuff. What do you think? Wow, whatever your name is, that is great. You're a go-getter. I'm going to promote you. So if you take the extra time to make something better and you show it to the boss and compare it side by side with what they were asking for, generally they know what is better when they see it. And those people get rewarded. So that was a pretty common theme I see in a lot of companies, is that the people that are really enthused about it maybe aren't the people that are used to articulating something or taking chances, working a few extra hours. The other part of questions that I get asked typically early in the process from big companies is, what's the deployment methodology? Because they've been trained to think that way by major BI vendors. We have a deployment methodology that solves all your problems, right? And I usually say there isn't a deployment methodology, and they look at me, what do you mean? And I say, well, it's very, very cultural dependent on how your organization can work. How far are you willing to go, how fast? And the extreme examples would be, I've worked in university settings where everything is siloed. The buses are at war because there really isn't anything to worry about other than who has a bigger piece of the pie, and so they're not going to move fast on anything. The other extreme is some place like Facebook, where it's a sort of a monolithic culture where they encourage risk-taking and change. And so the two most extreme examples that we've worked with in the last 5 years have been Facebook and Cisco. Facebook has sort of got this organic growth model. Yes, they've bought some big companies, but they've largely grown through, organic growth. And they have a very sort of typical employee that is pretty consistently a ninja hacker that wears a backpack and carries all their computer gear with them. And they're encouraged to experiment. And they don't mind mistakes. They like to iterate through a lot of mistakes quickly to get to the good stuff. So that culture is easier to go fast in. Now, Cisco, on the other hand, has grown mainly through acquisition the last 15 years. And there is not a monolithic culture there. In fact, it's really more like dozens or hundreds of different cultures, both within functional areas and between the companies. So those two situations, you can't plug in the same model. It won't work. And Facebook had this very centrally controlled model with a really strong leader. They had decided early on, we like this tool, it encourages sort of behaviors we like, so we're going to make this center of excellence. We're going to populate it with people that are just total gurus in data visualization, and we're going to go fast. And so they went from 0 licenses to like 500 desktops in a very short period of time, and it's just gone from there. Cisco, on the other hand, had a secret group of a small number of zealots who couldn't admit that they were using it because it was not an officially sanctioned product. That was the other brilliant thing Tableau did early on. They made it inexpensive enough that a department manager could buy it on a credit card and hide it from IT. And of course, that was their strategy. And you know, I would talk to clients and they'd say, yeah, we got a few licenses, and I'd say, I think you got a few more than that. You know? And Tableau, of course, knew every single license everywhere in that company. There might be, the guy that thought they had 2 licenses had 70, you know, spread all over the place, and Tableau's just trying to help those people do great things. So the moral of that story is that they seeded the good people in these companies with help. So a lot of the Tableau salespeople's mission is just to help those people do good things, and it ends up propagating. So at Cisco, I actually had off-site meetings with IT people that were afraid and couldn't admit that they were using the tool or that they wanted it to succeed because it wasn't sanctioned. We literally had secret off-site meetings. Now the risk takers there ended up winning an award from John Chambers a couple years later, but it was a big career gamble for these guys to take. And it wasn't such a simple story that I just told. There was a lot of, you know, false starts and problems, but they were able to overcome those. The end result was Cisco suddenly realized this was a good tool, but they didn't mandate it was going to be used. They just created a bank. And a guy in California that doled out money for technology projects of any kind, but specifically a lot of Tableau projects. And you would call up and say, I want to do a Tableau project. You'd describe how many users, and they'd say, okay, you get 50,000. Come back and see me in 3 months. And if you did good things, we'll give you some more money. But you have to show me something. So it became this very different, slower process, but in a given month now, I think we probably work on 5 or 6 different Cisco projects that are completely, absolutely different from the other ones. But that works in their business. So the point is, both of them are successful. And I had last week, a weird in-between hybrid. This is a huge company, really well-known company. And the guy told me, our deployment model is we got pregnant. And once we got pregnant, we realized we had to outfit the baby's bed and the car seat and buy the clothing. And what he meant by that is that I worked with them about a year ago and thought this is going to be a disaster because they're doing exactly the wrong things. They're using Tableau to build crosstabs that look exactly like their old tool, and they're scaling up to massive. This is usually a formula for a gigantic failure. And I went back literally last week. I was called back and I thought, oh, this is going to be bad. It's going to be their data people panicking because nothing scales. And I'm going to have to re-educate them into what they should have been doing. But what actually happened, the project manager said, Dan, it's been a massive success. I'm like, why? And he goes, well, we realize these are terrible, but we've saved $2 million in report prep time. So we've gotten pregnant, and now we're going to learn how to build good data visualizations, and we're going to get a whole nother round of improvements out of this, which is the weirdest deployment strategy I've ever heard of, but it worked in this company, or it's about to be a multiplied number of millions of more dollars of savings and opportunity gain because they're going to actually leverage what Tableau does well. All right? So I'm going to talk next about some things you need to do to build effective dashboards. And I have to say, at Nike, I just want to preface this, the work that you've done at Nike is just about some of the best work I've seen anywhere in the world. And it's utterly amazing to me that you've only been using it for 6 to 8 months. I mean, the look, appearance, the execution is really, really outstanding. You need to be talking at a customer conference about what you've done here because it's really amazing. So normally user groups aren't seated with Nikes everywhere in the room. So I'm going to talk about basically chapter 8 of the book in an abbreviated way. I'm just going to talk about best practices that I follow. when building dashboards. So first thing is, it's a really good idea to know the space you have to fit it in. Right, here's how not to do it. You're the data geek of your company, and you're really good at building stuff, so you have this really nice big monitor that's high res, you have a processor that's really kick butt, and you build this dashboard that looks absolutely beautiful on your screen. Now, that's great for you, but when you publish it to the consumption base, what's the worst monitor and the worst computer that has to look at it? So you got your really high res monitor, but there's some poor guy out there in the field that has 800 by 600 VGA level quality and a 4-year-old processor, and he types like this. That's not going to be the same experience for that person. So I always worry about that. And I learned this the hard way. I had a client 5 years ago, and I asked that question, what's the worst? And the guy didn't know. And I said, well, this loaner laptop, this really crappy laptop you gave me, can I be assured that this is the worst case? Oh yes, that'd be the worst. Guess what? It wasn't. All right, so I spent a week, I built like 5 dashboards. I did a presentation for their global management team. They absolutely loved the dashboards. And Tableau called me the next day and said, what'd you do there? We sold $90,000 worth of desktop licenses today. I said, really? Cool. And the next day I went into their quality group to sort of get it all vetted because they're going to deploy. And guess what? It didn't fit in the consumption environment because they were going to publish it all to basically a website. And that was like 450 by 450 pixels, and everything I built was 800 by 600. And I have to go back to the project manager and say, I need another week. And the guy goes ballistic. So don't assume people know, and don't take the answer, it's just okay, yeah, that'll probably work, because it's probably going to cost you some time if you don't get that nailed. The other thing is, they need to load quickly. My favorite example of how that doesn't work so well is senior VP gets convinced Tableau's cool. They see a cool Tableau visualization by some Tableau guy that's really good at demonstrating the product. Wow, this looks fast and easy. And then the first dashboard that guy gets with their data takes 6 minutes and 30 seconds to load. And that is not a fun call, all right? So I get this call from a Tableau sales guy saying, Dan, you got to help me out here. This guy's bought $500,000 worth of software. They could easily buy $2 million worth of software, but he's really unhappy. I said, okay, have him call me. And I say, well, describe, sir, what you've got. After he'd gotten over the fact I didn't work for Tableau and yelling at me did him no good at all. And he described for me his dashboard. Here it is. He's got a Teradata database with billions of records. He's a global manager. The dashboard has 2 panes of data and 13 quick filters. Right? For those of you working with Tableau, do you think that'll ever load quickly? No, because some of the dimension tables that the quick filters were on had thousands of members in the set. So what Tableau does when it builds a quick filter is it has to scan the table to know what's in the filter so it could apply that. So that 6-minute and 30-second load, 6 minutes and 22 seconds was loading the quick filters. And the rest was the data. And my response to the guy was, you know, 2 problems with that, sir. That design will never load quickly, A, and B, it sucks. He goes, but I need all those quick filters. And I said, of course you do. I believe that. But there's a better way. And I'll show you the better way in a moment. And then making the dashboard itself easy to understand. In other words, the rule of thumb would be, would a person that knows nothing about our business have some clue about what the dashboard story was that it was telling? And would it be somewhat intuitive and easy to figure out by just looking at the dashboard how to navigate it, how to filter things? What happens when you highlight? If you can follow those rules, you're probably going to have a good success with whatever dashboard you build. And then as a starting point for a lot of the dashboards I build, I think this way. 4 panes of data in sort of this pattern, because people usually look at the upper left first unless you give them a reason to look somewhere else. Everybody, more or less in the United States, is taught to read that way, so I try to leverage that. And you know, in a normal resolution monitor, that usually fits well. Now, everything I tell you about best practices here really applies to best practices to make it load quickly, right? I've built plenty of dashboards that don't exactly adhere to this, but this is my starting point. And then the other thing is, I make cascading designs. I think of this dashboard as the 50,000 foot view. And this is the 40,000, and this is the 30, and then eventually you're down to the ground level. And the reason that that works is that each level has painted a certain number of marks, and you've broken up the load in the rendering that Tableau has to do. And also think about the 13 quick filter scenario. We got that down to about 6 to 8 seconds load time, because we went from 13 quick filters with 2 panes of data to a series of, I think it was 6 levels of 4-pane dashboards without a quick filter visible. It was all filtering through the data itself using filter actions. So the dashboard itself was more interesting to the boss. He still had the filtering. It loaded quickly. He was really happy with that result. And it was 90 minutes of work to get that problem figured out. The guy that built the dashboards was actually a brilliant guy. He just didn't understand how Tableau worked. Once he understood how it worked, it was like, oh, I get it. So this style of dashboard works in a lot of different use cases. And you know, I almost never put quick filters on a dashboard. That's just me. I try to make everything filtered by the data itself. And I put little small instructions there. So I'll show you an example of this. This is everything in the book, or mostly everything in the book, is built with standard Tableau reports and data sources. So let me find what I need here. There it is. So this is a dashboard that more or less adheres to what I just told you. Not exactly. It's basically a 4-panel design, except in the upper right, you see this little select year area. It's a small crosstab. Takes up about as much space as a multi-select filter, but it shows data that you wouldn't see in a multi-select filter. And so the other thing you'll notice is that there's particular font styles that have a specific meaning. Like the italicized brown font means I'm an instruction. And that's something that I try to follow consistently with clients. If I'm going to make a small instruction, I make it the same font style, the same font size, so that people can look at a dashboard and say, oh, those are instructions. I need to read those. And when you're deploying massively, it helps to be repetitive and consistent. So, you know, 4 panels basically, and then that small crosstab is actually a 5th panel. So I've violated my rule, but I've done it in a way that's consistent with my other rules. So there is a crosstab here, but it's heavily filtered and aggregated, and it all fits without scrolling. That's the other sin I try not to violate. Is yes, there are times when vertically scrolling in a dashboard is good, but if you had scrolling going both vertically and horizontally, I'm going to say you're sinning. You need to rethink your design. Because that's sort of the worst sin you could commit in a dashboard, is make people scroll to see the data. Try making aggregates that help people see 50,000 feet, 40,000 feet, 30,000 feet. So the whole idea is, if they want to see more data, we'll give them a drill down path to see more data. So the crosstab up there is sort of meant to be the primary place to look in the beginning. Over to the right, you're seeing different metrics in a scatter plot, profit versus market spend. Down in the lower left, it's a bullet graph. How many of you are using bullet graphs, by the way? Never enough. Everybody in the room should be raising their hand. Why? If it matters to look at a bar chart where you're comparing one thing to another, certainly it would be interesting to put context like budget, in this case. That's a budget comparison. It could be prior year. It could be forecast 1, 2, 3, 4. Different colors. You see this little color gradient behind that? That's 60% of budget. That's 80% of budget. I could put 100% of budget, 120% of budget. So in the context of what we're looking at here, a sales report. That I get no bonus. That I get a slight percentage of my bonus. Here the kids get G.I. Joe with Kung Fu Grip for Christmas. Anything out here, I quit working and go golfing for the rest of the quarter. So it gives you this context, and when you think about the stuff you're working on and analyzing this way, there's always some level of acceptability. So these were invented by Stephen Few as a rebuttal to the pie chart. How can you show this in a pie chart? Actually, there's a couple things more desirable about this than a pie chart. First off, people, humans, can compare linear things more precisely than odd-shaped pie charts. And then what's the problem when you get into the little sliver of the pie? You've all seen magazines where they have pie charts with 800 little arrows coming out with all the metrics. It's sort of worthless in that context. So the bullet graph shows you actual. In this case, the comparator is budget, and then some progress towards that of acceptability. And then the other thing I'll point out here is that I tend to use color one primary way in a dashboard. By the way, your use of color at Nike in your dashboards is really good. It's excellent, in fact, because it's muted, it doesn't overwhelm, and it's very intuitive what's going on. There really is very good execution of that. In this case, color is primarily used for a high-level hierarchy of the product type. Right? And then there's a secondary use of color here, but it's muted. The secondary use is, I want it to be blue if it's below budget. And that's repeated everywhere. You can see, like, this is very close to the line. Is it above or below? If I hover over it, I can see that in Tooltip, but wouldn't it be nice to just give you a visual confirmation that it's in fact below budget? And then you can see in the crosstab, that blue theme is repeated. In the time series chart, which is a spark line in this case, the portions of the line that are below budget are blue as well. So it's a muted use of color that is actually fairly meaningful. All right, so some other things about this that aren't immediately obvious. If I hover over a particular mark, the tooltips are fairly stylized. I tend to use tooltips to put more verbose instruction because it only takes up space when it matters to people, when they're pointing at it. Things like being able to filter with the filter action. You can see I have a small instruction that explains that. Click on the sales heading to select all years. Click on whatever. Anyway, if I click on 2012, you notice that the headings in the panes that that filter applied to give you some visual confirmation of what people are looking at. So in this pane it says 2012, there it's 2012, scatter plot, but in the spark line it's always both years. So that's a technique that I use often. If I'm applying filtering with a action, it's not obvious to people what's going on. Whereas a quick filter is very obvious, this is less obvious. So I have an instruction. This is Edward Tufte, small instruction near the work. Select year is just the hint. Click headers or marks to highlight. Press escape to remove highlights. So I click a header or this. At that level of detail, it's highlighting the relevant products at a lower level of detail in that same schema. So each of these, coffee is made up of these three product lines. All right, and you'll notice that the color here is all coffee, but shape relates to the different products. Now if I click out of that and I click on just decaf Irish cream, now that level of detail is highlighted. So how did I do that? Actually, you don't even have to know how to do that. What I suggest to people is, if you want to highlight, just click this little crayon doodle thing over here, like this, and click that, and then go here and do it the same thing on the shape shelf. And you know what's happening in the background? Tableau is writing filter actions, or excuse me, highlight actions, automatically for you. You don't even have to understand what you've just done, but if you want to go up and look at it, go to action, and see this highlight generated? That's what I just made. Right? And if you want to look at what it just made, edit, and here's advanced Tableau. All right? I didn't write any of it. I didn't pick any of the selections. but in the upper half, you've got the source sheet is the main dashboard. All the panes where there's a check mark is where you can invoke the action from. Down below is, well, we're staying on the main dashboard here. And then all the other things down below that were basically everything to everything. Down here is special because of the way I click those. It's limiting how the highlight action is applied to just those 2 dimensions. So it's a subtle thing, but that's how you get highlighting to work at the appropriate level of detail. The important thing to note here is I don't even have to understand what I just did. Tableau's doing it for me in a subtle way. And they've improved this in version 8. It used to be persistent only in the session. Now it sort of stays forever. I usually recommend to people to give it a meaningful name, because 2 weeks from now you'll forget about everything you did in this dashboard and somebody will ask you to change something. So I drop a lot of breadcrumbs along the way when I'm doing things.
Can you illustrate that concept with a highlight you created on here just to reinforce?
Yeah. So all I did was select from the legends. See this little crayon highlight thing that appears? I just clicked on something in that to generate a highlight. And then I went down to the shape one and did the same thing. That is generating an highlight action automatically in Tableau. And whenever Tableau generates something automatically, it uses that word generated. So highlight 1 generated is what was created automatically. And I would probably change that and give it an actual name. You know, I would do something like this. Go in and edit it and say highlight. Oops. So now I've got sort of a breadcrumb that months from now, if I have to come back and look at this design, I've got a very specific name on that action. So you're going to get into this and you're going to build dashboards that have 5, 6, 8 actions that are very intricately applied in specific ways. I would say pane whatever to pane whatever, you know, and give myself a very specific brain-dead set of action names so that I can go back quickly and edit things if I need to. Now, another aspect to this, obviously tooltips are important. If you can put a lot of detail in tooltips for the likely questions that are going to come up when someone points at something, that's very helpful. And then this is where we get into cascading actions. The highlight action is a point and click. This second action I'm going to show you is called a menu action. And menu actions will appear in tooltips when you hover. So I like to use these for what I call our jump filters, where I'm jumping to another level of detail in a dashboard supporting this that might look very different. So if I hover and I want to look at, say, Columbia in more detail, for related metrics by market, click the blue text below. Well, what does that do? Oh, it does this. Now, what just happened? So there's a few things. Here's this context of this dashboard. I'm a little coffee distributor, and I want to look at my sale by geography and put a lot more numbers out here. But I also want to compare it to how Amazon sells similar products. So this is another type of action called a URL action, where I've embedded an actual live Amazon dashboard. And notice the words coffee and Colombian here. Notice the dynamic headings here. I was pointed at the coffee product type and the Colombian coffee. So I've actually somehow passed my data to an embedded Amazon web page here. And this is remarkably brain dead to build. Let's just say you aren't a programmer. Right? You know nothing about web programming, but you know you can open up your web browser and go to Amazon's website. And you can type in the words coffee and Colombian and press enter. Then you see a string appear in your web browser that has the word coffee and Colombian. Copy, open up and add a web object. This guy right here, web page. You put it in there, you've got 90% of the work done. Now you just hunt for the words and you replace them with dynamic tags from your data. It's literally highlight the word, in this case coffee, and embed from the action, the URL action, a little dynamic that comes from your data. So you don't even have to really understand what you're doing other than that. You can build something that's kind of sophisticated. Now the other question should be, how did I get it to bring that up? Well, I used a hover action. So I'm tricking the user by, they're probably going to come here and move their mouse